internet. You're listening to Debi Radio 79.5 FM, a podcast where we discuss the movie Grosse Pointe Blank 1 minute at a time. I am your co-host, Hugh David.
And I'm your other co-host, Dev. And on today's show, we're going to be looking at minute 42.
Joining us on today's show, we have John Strawn of the Super-candid podcast. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome back, John. It's good to have you back.
Good to be back.
And so in today's minute, we have Martin Blank spying on Debbie down a sniper scope or rangefinder and trying to figure out who else is in town, courtesy of his excellent PA, Marcella, who is going to find all of this out for him. Who the two spooks, the government spooks, and the ghoul, the other hitman in town are, making this a town of 3 hitmen and 2 government agents in a very small, well-off suburb of Detroit. So definitely a place I want to be.
There's something really interesting about the fact that a man who's literally talking about doing an assassination on the phone is looking through what is basically, as you said, some sort of scope and or rangefinder, which still has crosshairs on it.
Yep.
The woman he used to love, she's literally in his crosshairs. Like, we're not going to be metaphorical here. We're not going to do subtext. It's like,
yes,
here we go, bang.
As Marcella is asking him if he's done the job, is he being professional? Is he on the job? And he's got Debbie in his sights.
Yeah.
And he doesn't know how apropos that is yet.
No, and neither do we, but it's perfect foreshadowing. Yeah, and also it's like that whole thing about this is his focus, actually. His real target, his real focus is her. This is what it's really all about. But at the same time, it's spooky. It's just like, dude, come on. You're standing in the middle of the high street, in the sun, dressed all in black, looking at your ex through a sniper scope. Like, that is kind of that ought to be the definition of, something very wrong with you.
Yes.
I love that his answers to Marcella's questions remind me of me when I'm sat in a meeting and I haven't been listening. And it's like the most generic, like, let's try and punt this without making it obvious that I haven't been paying any attention whatsoever kind of answers. Not that I ever don't pay attention in meetings, but...
Dude, of course.
Would that I didn't pay attention in meetings. This is exactly how I would be responding.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's fair. I have been guilty of this before. I do want to, regarding the business of why one should be careful about what kind of person looks through scopes at people. I can't believe I'm going to say this on a podcast. So in 2002, I lived in Brighton in the south of England, and I shared a flat with a guy who was a incredibly well-paid programmer for financial systems, although he'd started in web. And he made a ton of money, and back then didn't even have to work from. He didn't even have to go into the office all the time either. He was already doing like half a week work from home and stuff. And so he just had a whole bunch of like he had toys like grown up toys. So he had a couple of sports cars, right, and all sorts of things. And one time he was like we used to drink a lot. Like, for his birthday, he got given an optic, which, if you don't know, is the thing you put on a bottle in the bar so you can put a glass under it and have it pour out. He was given an optic to attach to our coffee table in the lounge, and we would each buy a different bottle each week, right? Anyway, one night, Saturday night, we're sitting there, and it's autumn, and so it's getting dark early. And we're watching TV, and we've got this big old window that looks out because we're in an under roof flat. We're right up on the hill in Brighton, by the way. So it looks right down across all these other houses, and you can actually see the sea from where we are, right? So it's gorgeous, and sun's going down. And he says to me, "Have you ever used a night vision scope?" And I'm like, "No." And he's like, "Do you want to try a night vision scope?" I was like, okay. And he comes out with this ex-Russian night vision thing that he picked up on eBay. I have no idea why you bought this. He says, I just thought it'd be fun. So we sit there, we're half cut, we're drinking, and we take turns looking out the window using this night vision. And I suddenly realized that the house opposite us, like well, so it's 2 streets away, but we can see directly into the back windows. I suddenly realize it is populated by student nurses. It's Saturday night, and they're getting ready to go out.
Classic.
And I was like, we were both single at the time. And I was like, I handed him the glasses, and he's looking, and he hands them back, and we both look at each other, and he's like, we really should stop, shouldn't we? Yeah, we really should. Like, this is not what anyone looking at. If anyone knew what we were doing, this is not right, is it? No, this is not right. Okay, so we put it away, put the lights on, close the curtains. But it's just that moment where you're like, what are we doing here exactly? So when I say, "Oh, Martin, what are you doing?" I really mean it.
Yeah.
You know, like, dude, really? Just I like the fact that when he starts talking on the phone, there's a point where he suddenly looks around him, like he suddenly realizes, oh wait, I'm in public, and puts the scope away really, really quickly. So even he has his moment. He gets that moment. He's like,
is it that he's had that realization, or is it the realization that he wasn't paying attention to his surroundings with regards to possible targets?
Both.
Yeah.
Why not both?
Probably.
Considering that he then has the line, just being a professional.
Yeah, and I always kind of felt like he was actually speaking about his interactions with Debi in that, rather than his interactions with the target. I mean, obviously not with the target, because he hasn't even looked at his target yet,
but
or
he's
anything
obviously
in the
trying
packet.
to cover that. Yeah. But he is very much kind of. But it is, as you say, that if there is a subtext here, that's the subtext. It's about his behavior and what he's doing and how he's doing it.
Go ahead. So, I mean, I'm kind of skipping through to the second half of this minute. If you've not got anything else on the sniper scope and the spying on Debi bit.
Yeah, the only thing I was thinking of when we were talking about him being so obvious and simply looking at her in the middle of the street, I was thinking, when I first moved into this house, I was setting up a telescope because I like to do stargazing sometimes, and I was using the tree above my neighbor's house to line up the viewfinder and the telescope. And so I was in the front yard with my telescope. It's a fairly large telescope pointed directly at what for all intents and purposes was my neighbor's upstairs windows. And I felt very self-conscious about it. I ended up moving to reorient, so I'm looking in a way that it does not appear to be viewing into my neighbor's house while I was doing that. And I think in this world he's lost his sense of being observed, because as a hitman he's so used to working in the shadows, he thinks that he's always invisible. And at least in the film, I can't recall if anybody ever comments on him doing any of these things. It seems to be the rest of the people just go about their business while he's doing these rather suspicious activities.
I mean, it is the middle of what is presumably a working day, right? Like, I feel there may not be that many people around or paying attention to this kind of behavior. I do feel like I'm missing out, though, by not having a story of like weirdly realizing that I'm creeping.
Sorry, John, you missed earlier. I gave a similar story to do with night.
Yes,
yeah. So
I could, I caught most of it.
So I'm just feeling left out now. I need to try and get myself into some odd situation where somehow I am now inexplicably being a weird creep.
I think you were.
I'll work on it.
I think you were just a little bit less odd than us when you were younger. Maybe. Yeah. I don't know. It was a weird thing, right? I can't help it. It's like looking back at the 70s and 80s as a kid. There's like, I was obsessed with like little like jokey guidebooks for kids, so like how to be a spy and learn to be a detective in 1 week and that kind of thing. And so it was always like a weird obsession thing of like wanting a telescope, but also as I was into stars and stuff, I was into astronomy. You kind of go, it all kind of weirdly ties together. John's not the first person I've met where we share that weird thing in common of how, wait, what am I doing here? Oops, better change it.
Yes, I think Martin almost forgets why he called Marcella in the first place,
Yes.
because he calls her and then immediately is distracted again by Debbie.
Yes.
In the he initiated the phone call.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very, very true. Very true. But she's also busy, which is interesting.
Yeah, I think also like he gets put on the back foot by her interrogation of him.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Like all of a sudden she's grounding him in the fact that the primary reason he's there is to actually do a job that he's completely ignored. And that
Yes.
that throws him. That's that moment of, oh wait, I'm in a meeting I should have been paying attention to and I've missed the last
Yes.
like 10 minutes of it. Is and I think
She
that has
assumes he's calling to tell her it's complete.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think that, that's an interesting element or an interesting approach for her, given that we feel like up to this point she's been pushing him to this high school reunion to try and get him out of the business, which is a perspective that Hugh and I have kind of been reflecting on, and this really undermines that. This is like she's been pushing him to do a job, and just maybe it literally is because she finds it amusing that he came from somewhere that she's been pushing him to go to the reunion.
Yes.
Because even if she didn't think he'd actually go, she might have been nudging him a bit harder in this conversation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Something I considered thinking of, as Martin pulls out this excellent example of mid 1990s cell phone technology is what dates this film is the natural joke that I think if you were to be making this film today would be Marcella monitoring him more closely, and calling him out on, okay, you're being professional. Well, it looks like you're standing outside the door of the radio station, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
GPS or.
But she has no awareness of his activities other than what he tells her.
Yeah. There's something that just wouldn't really come about these days. I never even thought of it, but you're absolutely right.
And like to use the phrase from the Marvel Spider-Man movies, is that she's the person in the chair, the mastermind, who can access all this stuff, and she does some of that, but just maybe because of the technology of the era, she's not whispering in his ear the way that you would see in a modern movie of there's the two government agents are to your left or something like that.
But not post 24. Everybody, including James Bond, did that. Pre 24, no one does it.
Yes,
basically, absolutely. But speaking of that sort of thing, one thing I do find interesting is the use of slang phrases that relate to his profession, that where I know one to be true and one may or may not be true. So he says, I've already seen 2 spooks and a ghoul. And I find that really nifty little bit of dialogue, because spooks, that's an age-old phrase for government agents, so that's fine.
Yes.
The ghoul, of course, is the character played by Benedict the Jet Erquades, a.k.a. Monsieur La Poubelle. And I love that idea that you would have a name for the sort of people who are just completely without morals, absolute stone-cold killers, the sort of thing that Martin claims not to be, but actually the people that do what he does.
And it seems like, does he distinguish between a ghoul and somebody like Grocer, who he views as a peer, a fellow professional in a sense?
Yeah, I wonder, right? That's just, it's a really interesting choice. I also don't think we ever come across it again. I feel like it's just this weird little moment.
Yes. Yeah. How many is it? I'm trying to think. I believe it's just Grocer's people later in the film.
I mean, it's also an interesting choice of word because it's something fairly parasitic, right? Like,
yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a really
something
choice.
Unsettling, distasteful. He obviously views it as beneath him.
Yeah, exactly. But it's one of those things where it comes back to things we've said both with previous guests and with yourself about the film's concept of being a killer, in the sense that there's this world in which there is a degree of professionalism, there's a set of skills, there's a certain degree of etiquette But at the same time, it's also the way that's fictionalized, so the audience buys it. This idea of dialogue where the audience doesn't know if it's actually correct or not, but it sounds right, so we buy it.
I I think it's interesting to distinguish Benny Urquidez's professional role from the other killers, because
Yes.
he's there to enact revenge on the part of presumably his employer. So he's kind of like a mafioso thug, not necessarily a professional assassin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
More of an enforcer.
Yeah, maybe.
That's a good way to look at it. I like that, the distinction between being an enforcer and being an assassin. That's kind of that. There is a difference there.
And I think
whatever kind of marketplace that Marcella is looking at, presumably Martin is not not listed there. Although I'm trying to recall, does Grocer make a reference to the fact that there's a contract on Martin himself?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, they discuss about it because Martin also asks if Felix was put out by Grocer, if that was Grocer's doing, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's this spectrum, right, where like Martin is this high-end professional that has known clients, he works with those clients, and he performs a job that is something that works within his moral sphere. And then you've got Grocer, who comes, I think, from a similar background and works that, but is, has no qualms about doing stuff that worms more into the gray and black areas of the world. And then you've got Felix, who's probably not come from a military, or at least a US military background, and is just a pure gun for hire, right? Like he takes Grocer's wet work and is just to the nth degree, right? Not quite like, psychopathic serial killer, but like very much trending in that direction, right? Like has no qualms about doing anything anytime.
And then your two government agents who are happy to be paid off by Grocer, but don't want to necessarily do something that might get them in legal trouble. So they need a justification in order to do the job that Grocer wants them to do.
Yeah, I'm not even sure they're getting paid by Grocer. I think they're just in it for the career progression, right? Like Grocer's given them this lead. It's somebody that they know is a hitman. If they can get the goods on him and take care of him, that's going to look great for their career advancement. And I think that's where they're.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's a mutually beneficial relationship. Grocer hands them people every now and then.
Yeah.
And that's at least I feel like it has to be that, because I don't think Grocer literally is a gross guy, but I feel like he's at least partly genuine in his whole appeal to let's bring us all together, let's all be assassins together kind of thing. But the fact that he's willing to sell out another guy to the government, makes sort of makes me feel like actually, he doesn't want to be doing that. He doesn't like doing that. He's doing it because it's a solution to a problem, and he benefits from it. But he wouldn't do it otherwise. And I feel like he has a degree of disdain for the spooks. Because
I think everyone in the industry does, right? Because they're playing within the like they're sanctioned, right? It takes all the fun out of it if you're sanctioned, right?
Yeah, true. I guess so. I hadn't thought of it like that. It's such a James Bond thing, isn't it, to be sanctioned to do it?
Yeah.
Licensed.
Yeah. But that's where presumably Grocer, but certainly Blank was, right? But they were sanctioned to do it in war, right? In conflict, which is a little sexier. When you're sanctioned to do it domestically, it kind of loses its shine. You're just like, you're just working for the feds. You're one of the man, right? Like it loses all of that romanticism.
Yeah, so there's that it's kind of that progression that Martin mentions when he's explaining where he's been.
Yes.
In the army, at war, then he worked for the government, presumably doing more clandestine, James Bond maybe type stuff.
Black Ops.
Right.
And then he became an independent agent. And so, the government, maybe it's a case of the government doesn't necessarily have a contract out for him, but they'd prefer that he not exist anymore
Yeah.
because, for a variety of reasons, all the idea of him wandering around killing people doesn't seem to be their main issue. Like,
Yeah. And I think this is probably like playing up to that kind of CIA disdain for anything domestic, right? These guys are NSA, not FBI, but like the CIA are the ones that do the real like sexy work, right? Like he kills the president of Paraguay with a fork.
yes.
He's a colonel in an army in Burma where he's presumably doing something to take out the general. All of
Yes.
these big operations that are clearly not sanctioned, and he's clearly, doing what he does because he's good at it.
Yes, and it's interesting. I'm trying to. I believe the film Sneakers was a couple years before this,
Yes.
where the NSA was also the, operating outside the law somewhat, with James Earl Jones's character in that film.
Yeah.
Kind of prophetic, considering what happened about 10 years after that, right?
Sneakers is one of the greats. It's a totally unsung classic because it is literally on the money in so many ways about so many things. Not and that film also has a very interesting attitude of privatized work. The bit where Redford's like giving them the check for the for having done the penetration job, and the receptionist's like, what do you do? And he says, this is what we do. We break into people's places for a living. She's like, it's not a very good one. That's one of the best lines in American movies. They're like, really?
Yes, and also, I mean, between Sneakers and Grosse Pointe Blank, we have two of Dan Aykroyd's better films from the 1990s.
Absolutely, Aykroyd's. And the funny thing is that Aykroyd in Sneakers, apparently he based all of that on his brother. Apparently his brother's a total conspiracy nut, which I find fascinating.
Wait, this is Dan Aykroyd describing someone else as a conspiracy nut.
Well, that's my point. That's my point.
I was way up there.
I was like, wait, what? But he's basically become that character for real, hasn't he?
Yes, between the crystal skulls and everything else that he's into, or attempting to build. I think I heard that he was trying to build a real life proton pack in order to use that.
But yeah, as you say, between that and Grosse Pointe Blank, we have two of Dan Aykroyd's great 90s performances that really kind of cement the variety he's capable
of. Do we want to talk a little bit about Marcella going off on her order, or should we save that for the next minute so that we can get the
let's save it for the
soup
next
recipe in
minute.
as well?
Yeah, let's save it for the next minute because we're going to be talking about the second half of it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yes.
Okay, so
this was minute 42 of Grosse Pointe Blank podcast, Debi Radio 79.5 FM, featuring your hosts, co-writers and co-producers, myself, Dev Sodiger, and my buddy Hugh David.
Today's guest and guesting with us all this week is John Strawn, formerly of the Super-candid podcast. John, where can people find you these days if they want to talk to you online?
I'm pretty active in the Discord groups for the Star Wars Minute podcast and the iFanboy podcast. Highly recommend those. Also, might as well mention the Movies by Minute Facebook group, which is how we connected, and a great place for people who love the medium and are interested in getting into it, like myself.
Cool. Okay, and you can find us, presumably wherever you're listening to us, but as well as that, you can find us on all good podcast hosts and players, as well as on YouTube, X, aka formerly known as Twitter, Spotify, and in all cases our handle is at Debi Radio, DEBI Radio. We also have a website. Come and visit us there, debiradio.com. Once again, DEBI Radio.
And speaking of Facebook listeners groups, we have our own. It is Debi Radio 79.5 FM Fan Club. So join us there and we can talk more about this movie and movies in general.
Sure was clear that all of this was new. Concentrating hard like a little girl, smoking for the first time. It wasn't a moment. It was a feeling of